In 1983, one prison held some of the most dangerous and politically explosive inmates in Europe. It was called Maze Prison, a fortress in Northern Ireland built to contain men the British government considered terrorists, and men who saw themselves as soldiers in a war. The prison was designed to be escape-proof. Massive concrete walls, armed guards, watchtowers, steel gates, search procedures so strict that even breathing wrong could get you punished. But on September 25, 1983, everything changed. In a matter of minutes, 38 prisoners, overpowered guards, hijacked a prison food truck, seized control of an entire section of the prison, and carried out what would become one of the most audacious prison breaks in modern history. It was not just an escape. It was a military-style operation, a humiliation for the British government, a propaganda victory for the IRA, and a manhunt that would stretch across borders. This is the story of the biggest prison escape ever pulled off. To understand why this escape was so shocking, you first have to understand what Maze Prison really was. Located outside Belfast in Northern Ireland, Maze Prison, also known as Long Kesh, was not an ordinary prison. It sat at the heart of one of the most violent political conflicts in modern British history, the Troubles. For decades, Northern Ireland was torn apart by bombings, assassinations, riots, military patrols, and a bitter struggle over identity, power, and sovereignty. On one side were Irish Republican paramilitary groups, including the Irish Republican Army, or IRA, who wanted Northern Ireland to leave the United Kingdom and become part of a united Ireland. On the other side were British forces and loyalist groups determined to keep Northern Ireland under British control. In that conflict, prisons became battlegrounds, and Maze Prison became the most important prison of them all. It held hundreds of Republican prisoners and Loyalist prisoners, many accused or convicted of violent acts tied directly to the conflict. Its most famous structures were the H-blocks, named for their shape from above. Each H-block was built like a control machine: steel doors, narrow corridors, locked cells, constant surveillance, and strict movement routines. The message was simple: nobody gets out. But inside those walls, the prisoners were not thinking like inmates. They were thinking like organized militants. And that would make all the difference. Many of the men inside Maze Prison were hardened, disciplined, and deeply committed to their cause. Some had already spent years resisting prison authorities through protests, hunger strikes, and organized defiance. They were used to surveillance, used to punishment, used to planning in secret. To the prison administration, they were dangerous inmates. To themselves, they were prisoners of war. And that mindset mattered, because while normal inmates might dream of freedom, these men believed escape was part of the struggle itself. Every humiliation of the prison system was a victory. Every successful act of resistance sent a message beyond the walls. And somewhere inside the H-blocks, a dangerous idea began to grow. Not one prisoner, not two, dozens. What if they could break out together? It sounded impossible, but impossible plans are often the ones no one sees coming. The escape was not spontaneous. It was the result of months of patient, careful preparation. The men chosen for the operation were not random. They were trusted, disciplined, calm under pressure. Men who could follow instructions, stay silent, and act without hesitation. The first challenge was obvious. How do you overpower guards in a maximum security prison without being shot dead? The answer was as simple as it was terrifying. Smuggle weapons inside. At some point before the escape, handguns were successfully brought into the prison. To this day, the exact details remain clouded by secrecy, conflicting accounts, and political controversy. But what is clear is this: weapons that should never have been anywhere near those cells ended up in the hands of prisoners. That alone was a catastrophic security failure. Then came the second challenge: timing. The escape would have to happen during a moment when movement inside the prison could be controlled, when guards could be isolated, and when confusion could spread faster than orders. The chosen target was H Block 7. The time, an afternoon shift change, when routines created small gaps in control. And the final challenge: once outside the block, how do you get through the gates? The answer was brilliant: use the prison against itself. On the afternoon of September 25th, 1983, the operation began. It started with speed, surprise, absolute commitment. Prisoners inside H Block 7 moved suddenly and decisively. Guards were overpowered. Some were threatened at gunpoint. Others were attacked and restrained before they could raise the alarm. Keys were seized. Uniform pieces were taken. Control of the block shifted in moments. For the guards, it was chaos. The very men they were supposed to be containing had turned the prison into hostile territory. Reports later revealed that officers were beaten, bound, and held hostage as the prisoners expanded control over the area. Communication inside the prison began to collapse. In a place built on order, confusion became the escapees' greatest weapon. Then came the most daring phase. A prison food delivery truck arrived at the H Block. The prisoners seized it. This was their battering ram, their disguise, and their passport through the inner security system. Some of the escapees wore partial prison officer uniforms or used deception to appear less suspicious at a glance. The truck moved toward the main gate complex. But the main gate was the hardest obstacle of all. Beyond it was freedom, and beyond it was armed response. If they failed there, the entire operation would collapse in blood. The main gate area at Maze Prison was designed to stop exactly this kind of scenario. It was heavily controlled, heavily guarded, and protected by procedures meant to detect anything unusual. But in real life, even the strongest systems can fail when human beings are suddenly forced into fear and uncertainty. As the hijacked food truck approached, the prisoners used a combination of threats, speed, and confusion to force their way through the gate process. Guards at the gate were confronted before they fully understood the scale of what was happening. Some were taken hostage, others were ordered around at gunpoint. For a brief and surreal moment, the entire prison machine was working for the men escaping it. But then, something went wrong. The truck became jammed at the outer gate area. The escape nearly died right there. Seconds mattered. Alarms were spreading. Armed officers could arrive at any moment. And suddenly, the escapees were forced into the final phase without their vehicle. They ran. Some sprinted through openings. Some climbed fences. Some scattered in multiple directions. Outside the prison walls, civilians nearby reportedly saw men in prison uniforms running across fields and roads. In one shocking burst of chaos, 38 prisoners were out. The unthinkable had happened. The most secure prison in Northern Ireland had been breached from the inside. News of the escape spread like wildfire. This was not a local prison break. This was a political earthquake. The British government was humiliated. Newspapers exploded with headlines. Security experts were stunned. Politicians demanded answers. How had guns entered the prison? How had dozens of prisoners coordinated without detection? How had a food truck been turned into an escape vehicle? And the biggest question of all, where were they now? A massive manhunt began immediately. Roads were sealed. Checkpoints intensified. Police and military units moved fast. Intelligence networks were activated. Some escapees were captured quickly, found hiding nearby, exhausted, injured, or unable to get far in the first hours. But many vanished into support networks that had likely been prepared in advance: safe houses, sympathizers, hidden transport routes. This wasn't just an escape. It looked increasingly like a coordinated operation reaching far beyond the prison walls. In the days that followed, the search spread across Northern Ireland, into the Republic of Ireland, and beyond. Some of the escapees were recaptured in dramatic circumstances. Others managed to evade authorities for months, even years. A few reportedly made their way to other countries, including the United States, where legal battles and extradition fights would continue long after the escape itself. Every arrest became a headline. Every sighting triggered new fear. But what made the manhunt so difficult was the political environment. In deeply divided communities, information did not flow easily. Some people wanted the men caught immediately. Others viewed them as heroes who had embarrassed a hated system. That made the escape more than a criminal event. It became a symbol. To the British state, it was a disastrous security failure. To many Republicans, it was proof that even the most secure prison could not break their movement, and symbols are powerful, sometimes more powerful than walls. But beneath the drama, there was also violence. This was not a clean Hollywood getaway. During the escape, prison officers were assaulted and traumatized. Several were injured, and one prison officer, James Ferris, suffered a heart attack during the events and later died. For many prison staff and their families, the escape was not legendary. It was terrifying. It exposed just how quickly order can collapse when a controlled environment turns hostile. The men escaping may have seen themselves as soldiers, but the people caught in the middle, guards, workers, and civilians, experienced fear, confusion, and violence. That complexity is what makes this story so powerful. It depends entirely on where you stand. Was it a masterstroke of resistance, or a reckless and dangerous act that could have ended in a massacre? History still argues about that. Looking back, the Maze prison escape succeeded because of 5 critical failures. First, discipline inside the prison. The escapees acted with coordination that looked more like a tactical unit than a group of inmates. They stayed organized, moved fast, and stuck to the plan. Second, insider knowledge. They understood routines, weak points, timing, and guard behavior. Maximum security prisons are powerful, but they are also repetitive, and repetition creates patterns. Third, smuggled weapons. Once firearms entered the equation, the entire balance of power changed. A prison can survive fists. It struggles when inmates suddenly have guns. Fourth, use of the food truck. Instead of trying to tunnel out or climb walls under fire, they used a legitimate prison vehicle to penetrate deeper into the gate system. It was clever, practical, and almost absurdly bold. Fifth, external support. The speed with which many disappeared strongly suggested outside planning, safe locations, transport, and a network ready to receive them. In other words, the escape didn't begin on September 25th. It began long before that. Not all 38 men remained free. Some were caught within hours, some within days, others much later. Over time, many were returned to custody or faced separate legal battles in other jurisdictions. A few became especially controversial because of extradition disputes, particularly in the United States, where courts and politicians sometimes treated the cases through the lens of the wider Northern Ireland conflict. Some supporters argued these men were political actors, not ordinary criminals. Opponents argued that violence is violence, no matter the flag. And once again, the escape became larger than itself. It was no longer just about prison security. It was about law, legitimacy, politics, propaganda, and power. Even years later, the escape remained one of the most famous and controversial moments of the Troubles. Today, the 1983 Maze prison escape is still remembered as one of the most extraordinary prison breaks in modern history. In terms of scale, planning, and political impact, very few escapes compare. It was the largest escape from a prison in British history, And more importantly, it shattered the illusion that maximum security meant absolute control. Because every prison, no matter how strong, still depends on human beings, human routines, human assumptions, human fear. The walls were concrete, the gates were steel, the towers were armed, but the weak point was always the same: people. That is what made this escape so unforgettable. Not just that they got out, but that they turned the prison's own system into the weapon that freed them.